Hare Krishna. Well, it's been 2 years since I sat here. Even though I bought my house the same week we bought Krishna house with COVID and all. I've been here many, many times, but zooming in. But today I zoomed down the street and made it here. So I'm very glad to be here and see all of you. In my first post-COVID class. I hope you're all well and healthy. Some of you I go for walks with, I know you, and some I know from New York, some I don't know. So before I begin, today's a special class for me, and reasons that you probably know, but if not, I'll explain. But we're going to go around the room real quickly, and everyone is going to say their name and their service, if you don't mind.
Lunch, and I made the Krishna lunch salad dressing.
Christina, you also have some interest in the BI, I was told. So we'll talk sometime. Go on.
Haribo Prabhu, my
Hi,
name
Bo.
is Champaklata and I serve as the Women's Ashram leader.
Yes, yeah, very good. Nice to see you again, Chapak. Yes,
My name is Swati and I serve Krishna lunch.
okay.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, I know.
My name is Prabhupada Priya. I'm educational director and board member also.
Yeah,
Hi Krishna, I'm Janaki and my service is to do the ticket table at Krishna Lunch and outreach director.
right.
Hare Krishna. My name is Kumari Saki Devidasi, and I am technically the development director and the executive assistant to the president.
Very good. I like that title.
Hare Krishna, my name is
a several day period, but it's the 50th anniversary of when I escaped the state of Bihar. And those who are from India know what I'm talking about. And sat with Prabhupada in a hut for 3 days asking him questions at the bank of the Ganges. So I didn't expect that to happen. It was one of those serendipitous events. And now I've been told the book is coming out in its 59th language. So somehow or other, Prabhupada's, every once in a while, we end up at the right time at the right place. Many of you have experienced the opposite of that. I have, being the wrong time at the wrong place. So this was the right time at the right place for some very fortunate circumstances. And tomorrow I'll be speaking in Mayapur, in which they're commemorating the actual formal 50th anniversary and putting a plaque up in the Bhajan Kutir. And I actually had a ticket to India to go Saturday for that, but circumstances were such that that wasn't a wise thing to do. Even though India has said there's no more COVID, I just got a report today to the opposite. So, and I'm too old and ornery to get sick. Okay, so with that, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, I'm going to ask someone to read the verse in Sanskrit and then English, and somebody else to read the purport.
Sanskrit.
Go for it.
Narakastopi deham vae. Apumam staktum ittati. Narakyam nirvritao satyam. Devamaya vimohitaha. Narakastopi deham vae. Napumam staktum ittati. Narakyam nirvritao satyam. Devamaya vimohitaha. Narakastopi deham vae. Napumam staktum ittati. Narakyam nirvritao satyam. Devamaya vimohitaha. All together.
Narakastopi deham vai. Apumam staktum ittati. Narakyam nirvito satyam. Devamaya vimohita.
Okay, we will read the purport now. Would like to read the purport? A translation. I'll read the translation. The conditioned living entity is satisfied in his own particular species of life, while deluded by the covering influence of the illusory energy. He or she feels little inclined to cast off his body, even when in hell, for he takes delight in hellish enjoyment. And before we read the purport, I'll give a little prelude. This is not, how do I say this without going to detail? I won't, but you'll understand. When I first went to India, and I came across, using the bathroom in India is different than America in those days. When Achyutananda went to India, and helped him out, and Prabhupada shortly thereafter arrived. And Prabhupada then taught him how to use a lota, how to tie a kopin, all the things that he had no idea. And then Prabhupada turned to him. And at that time, ISKCON was extremely poor, very, very little money. But Prabhupada was sick and had gone back to India. And he turns to Achyutananda and says, if you like, I will buy you a Western toilet. Prabhupada was so kind that because in India, as most of the healthier parts of the world do, they use squatting toilets. It's a healthier position. In America now, some of you might have a squatty potty, they call it, which allows you to use a Western toilet in a more natural position. So when I first got to India and was stationed, I was in New Delhi learning Hindi and pretty comfortable position. And then when I went off to the countryside in Bihar, I had no idea what I was getting into. And then I'd learned, do you know what a pig's natural diet is? It's stool. Without going into more detail, I learned they like it hot from the oven. So, very disconcerting. So I'm trying to set the stage for what goes on in this purport. Now we'll continue the purport.
It is said that once Indra, the king of heaven, was cursed by his spiritual master, Brahaspati, on account of his misbehavior, and he became a hog on this planet. After many days, when Brahma wanted to recall him to his heavenly kingdom, Indra, in the form of a hog, forgot everything of his royal position in the heavenly kingdom, and he refused to go back. This is the spell of Maya. Even Indra forgets his heavenly standard of life and is satisfied with the standard of a hog's life. By the influence of Maya, the conditioned soul becomes so affectionate towards his particular type of body that if he is offered, give up this body and immediately you will have a king's body, he will not agree. This attachment strongly affects all conditioned living entities. Lord Krishna is personally canvassing, give up everything in this material world. Come to me and I shall give you all protection. But we are not agreeable. We think we are quite all right. Why should we surrender unto Krishna and go back to his kingdom? This is called illusion or Maya. Everyone is satisfied with his standard of living, however abominable it may be.
Okay, thank you. Actually, you read very well. You should do audiobooks. Really, a very good reading voice. I have a voice made for newspaper, and others have commented a face made for radio, but that's a different matter. So, what's going on here is a very heavy scene. This is in the third canto, and it's repeated again in the fifth canto. That here, Kapila Dev, whose incarnation, is speaking to his mother, and he's trying to develop a certain detachment from the body. And the verses all talk about how if you're overly attached to the body, then you get bewildered, and you can become so bewildered that you can be the king of heaven, who, due to a little cursing here and there, became a hog temporarily. And he's invited back. Give up your hogdom. Just come back. You can have everything you want. When we say heaven, it's very similar to every religion talks about the same concept. It's a nice place. Now, it's not a great place for devotees. Why is that? Can somebody tell me why? Yeah.
Because it's full of, because it's full of jealousy, between them and their position, and anxiety. Even though they may not suffer in the same way, they're still filled with all sorts of disturbances and their fear of the time factor, because eventually they're going to lose their heavenly position.
Except, your point is correct, except for one little detail. They don't know that. And you're right. And that's the intelligent way to look at it. And that's the way this chapter is looking at it. So you hit the nail on the head, but they don't know it. And why don't they know it? Because imagine you're in I'll tell you a story. When I was just getting into devotional service back in America from India, I had a family trip, my first one ever, to South Florida, which in those days wasn't as hellish like it is now. It wasn't traffic and sprawl and everything. And my in-laws had got some condominium, and there was beautiful breezes. And I went to the temple in Coconut Grove, and there were mango trees and fruit trees, and the weather was perfect. It was wintertime up north, and where you had sunny, nice breezes. It wasn't the crazy traffic jams and the smells and flowers, and it was really nice. And I actually remember thinking, glad I don't live here. Why? Because I was very attracted to it. And I'd understood, I just finished days of instruction from Prabhupada, and I understood that if I got too attracted like a hog to his own particular circumstances, that I couldn't raise my consciousness. I was into raising my consciousness. So at that point, I said, I hope I never end up in Florida. I actually said that to myself. And of course, when I'm speaking to my brother shoveling his snow, I'm damn glad I'm here. But that said, in that stage of my consciousness, I was really trying to understand that the enjoying mood could overwhelm me. But later on, I see what a perfect place for executing Krishna consciousness. So the heavenly planets can be a great distraction because they're so enjoyable. Everything works. Birth, death, you don't see much of that. You live your life, and then at the end of your life, you have a kid, and then you die peacefully. You don't have to worry about bringing up the kid. I mean, it has all kinds of circumstances like that. And kids, I can tell you, are just a total source of anxiety, one's whole life. And those of you who don't have kids, our kids, Prabhupada says in the 9th canto, that's very funny. It says, the parents come to me and say, is it in your religion to break the parent's heart? Because the children had joined the Krishna movement. And is that part of your religion? So Prabhupada actually says that in the purport. And of course, what happened is when the parents would meet Prabhupada, inevitably, almost every time, their heart would melt. And they'd say, yeah, my kid's better off. Okay, story after story after story like that. And Giriraj Swami's parents came to India and they met Prabhupada. And his father was very wealthy, a very prominent lawyer and judge, most prominent. And he came and he said, okay, here's $1 million, just come home and you can practice Krishna consciousness at home. Well, we're not objecting. And Giriraj Swami said, no, I want to be with my guru. And the parents actually respected that and came to appreciate Prabhupada. Always did. And that story is repeated over and over. My same with my own parents. I went to Rath Yatra in 76. And I was staying in my parents' house in Jersey. And I told them that Mr. Manischewitz had become Hare Krishna. Now, those of you may not know Manischewitz, but in the Jewish world, Manischewitz is well known because it's the largest maker of matzah and wine. Matzah, the unleavened bread for Passover, the communion wafer, to be precise. And so a very, very famous family. And there are two major families. One was called Manischewitz, the other was called, producer was Mogan David, the two big competitions. So Irmela, who many of you know, is Mr. Manischewitz, the daughter. So I told my father, I said, I just went to the Rath Yatra parade in New York. And Mr. Manischewitz is now a Hare Krishna. He was chanting japa, he participated in the parade. And my father turns to me and says, maybe we'll switch to the Mogan David brand. And later on, my father and mother, who were quite elderly, pulled Lord Jagannath down Fifth Avenue by as fate would have it. So later on in this chapter, there's a discussion how at the time of death, one is surrounded by their loved ones and they have that gurgling sound. If anybody's been with someone who dies, you'll know what I'm talking about. Has this gurgling sound and they can't say anything and they're attached. People are saying, oh, don't die. And they're trying to die and the Yamadutas are waving at them and not the, it's not the Vishnu Dutas. And it's a very rough scene. But when we talk about the passing of devotees or even devotee parents, story after story after story of something auspicious happening. So what's being said here is a little bit of a scare tactic. And the fifth canto gets into it deeper. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says what's being said in the fifth canto is allegorical and some factual. That we won't get into today. But the idea is it's a little bit of a wake-up call that if we're overly attached to the body, then time of death and the time of being alive is going to be a very difficult circumstance. Now, I was wondering what that noise was. Yeah. Okay. So, so in this chapter here, and the context is that Kapila is saying to his mother, "Hey, mom, get out of Maya. This is the reality of life." Now, when I first read these things or heard these things, it kind of shocked me a little because I have attachments. When I met Prabhupada, I was engaged to be married, which was 50 years ago, and I had various attachments. I didn't think I was wonderful, but I didn't think I was horrible. And so I come into this that how do I relate to what's going on in this world of birth, death, old age, disease, life seems okay. Am I no better than the hog? But have you thought like that? That I'm attached to these things, and so is the hog. So how do we break out of that? Now, that takes us to perfect questions, perfect answers. And I was asked to speak on that, so I will. The backstory, and I'll be speaking on this tomorrow in detail in Mayapur. And there's a Back to Godhead article that should come out any day now. And the whole backstory is there for those who need it. So I'm not going to go into great detail at this point. But like most of you, I come in a mixed bag. We're here because we knew there was something about higher consciousness. But we also, each of us, has our anchors pulling us down. It's like the story of the boatman. He's trying to row the boat and it goes nowhere as they realize the anchor's in the water. So each of us has our anchors. So the question of pulling up the anchors, how to do that, is in the essence of what Perfect Questions is about. And the backstory is, well, first, I'll tell you a mystical story. Does anybody like to hear a mystical story? A really good mystical story that's beyond belief. Now, in the very first conversation of Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers is not recorded. And what happened is I was the only guest at the first Mayapur festival, 60, 70 devotees, all about your age or younger, all quite zealous, and there were no adults in the movement. We had no Kalakantas, anybody like that. There were no adults in the movement. Those of you who had read Lord of the Flies will know what I'm talking about. So at the same time, we had such a sincere group of people. So one guest showed up at the Mayapur festival, other than villagers who didn't speak English. One English-speaking guest. Most of the devotees there were Western. A few Indians have joined, but not so many by that time. And there was one guest, me. And I was taken by my friend Tejas to meet Prabhupada. He had also been a Peace Corps worker in India. I was a high school teacher in the fine state. Yeah, and Krishna sent me to the most backward state because since I was a little boy, I was very attached to going to India. And when I read the Gita, I had to go to India. And when I saw the devotees chanting in the 60s in Greenwich Village, I had to understand what it's about. And the only way I was going to understand it was go to India as a native, not as a tourist. So I applied to the Peace Corps, which I very hard to get into. And I got accepted. And then they'll ask what country you want to go to. So I put in 3 boxes, India. Turns out that India was considered the booby price. It was more austere than even other assignments, which had a tendency to be austere, like African village or some Indonesian village or something. India actually turned out to be more austere in those days. Well, once I got accepted, if you wanted India, boy, we were looking for someone to go there. You got it. And when I went there, just a little backstory, I was living fairly comfortably in New Delhi in my training, and the people I was replacing that were going home were part of our training group, and they described their living conditions. And I said, my God, if I ever have to live like that, I'm on the next plane out of here. I mean, it was just like, I couldn't believe it. Then finally I got to my village, and it was nothing like they said. It was a lot worse. But at 22, you don't mind camping out, which is basically what it was, until I met the hogs. Okay, so that was an adventure that I'm still traumatized by. So there I am in Mayapur, and I got invited in to meet Prabhupada, and we started talking. And unfortunately, it wasn't recorded. Cassette tapes were very rare, and Shama Sundar, as Prabhupada's secretary, preserved them. But after the first conversation, he said, this is really interesting what Prabhupada's saying. So then he hit the record button. So unfortunately, the book doesn't begin at the beginning, because the beginning was Prabhupada says, who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? The normal pleasantries one would have in conversation. And Prabhupada really made me feel very, very relaxed and comfortable. And then we started talking about miracles. Because in India, you have many of these miracle men, people who can float on water and make things appear out of their hand. And one famous guru could make ashes appear. And so you have these, naturally I was very curious and interested in that. So I brought this up to Prabhupada. What about miracles? And Prabhupada told me only a fool believes in miracles. Miracles are a process. You just don't know the process. Just like a magician. A magician can do amazing things. Some of you have seen magicians. They open this curtain and then behind it there's a Ford Mustang. But there's a process by which they do it. I mean, I know a little bit of magic to entertain my grandchildren. They absolutely think it's miraculous. They just don't know the sleight of hand that's going on. And we have our Dattatreya in Alachua, if you know him, a great magician. I mean, he just bewilders me, and I know some magic. So Prabhupada explained there are no such things as miracles. It's a process you don't know. Yes, people can walk on water, they can do things, but it's a material process. So we had that conversation in the morning. And then we talked about science. Then Prabhupada invited me back later. Now, at that time in Mayapur, there was nothing. Who's been to Mayapur? There was only the Bhajan Kutir. There were two buildings in Mayapur. The Bhajan Kutir, which Achyutananda built for Prabhupada, and there was Prabhupada's straw outhouse. And then somebody had the brilliant idea to stick a piece of incense in a straw outhouse, and then poof, there was one building. Yeah, that was a very quick poof. But it's Mayapur, so an hour later, a new one was built. And we had a men's tent, a women's tent, a pandal tent. There was nothing to buy. There were no shops. I remember one vendor came by with coconuts, and that was it. You could buy some coconuts. 100% of what you could buy. So it was, and we were feeding Bangladesh refugees. There'd just been a huge war between India and Pakistan didn't exactly win that one. And Bangladesh became its own country instead of East Pakistan. And then there was a huge flood of refugees coming from Bangladesh just over the border to Mayapur. So I went up there to do food relief for refugees. I heard they're doing food relief for refugees. I didn't have to teach that time. So I went up there to do that. I didn't know Prabhupada would be there. I didn't know much about anything other than I had gone to India to understand deeper truths and fulfill a childhood desire. So then in the afternoon, Prabhupada called me back to talk. And Shama Sundar said, this is interesting, and hit the tape recorder. I had no idea it was being recorded. I actually had no idea that when I was speaking to Prabhupada, the whole doorway was full of heads like this all the way around. And the room was packed. Prabhupada so captured me by his presence. I sat at his feet, and I was just looking at his feet the whole time, not knowing there were other people even in the room besides Shama Sundar, the secretary. Later on, after the conversations were over, Shama Sundar turns to Prabhupada and says, those were perfect questions. And he says, those are perfect answers. Shama Sundar says, perfect answers, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, yes, make this a book. Call it Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. And that's how the book happened. Now, It sure surprised me, and Prabhupada wrote me a letter saying they're going to publish the book and this would happen. So all of that was quite surprising to me. Now, when I studied the Gita in college, in English, I didn't know a word of Sanskrit. I came across one verse that bewildered me. And the verse of Pete Chet Sudarshano, some of you might know that verse. And Bhajate Mam Anya Bhakta, which means even if one commits the most abominable activities, if he's engaged in devotional service, he's considered saintly because he's properly situated. Now, there are two kinds of computers. For our geeks in here will know this. There's a digital computer and an analog computer. Who knows the difference? Ooh, okay. I'll tell you the difference because it's spiritually important. Oh, you know it. Oh, yeah. Okay. Anybody, let us say you have a volume control on a radio or a player, and you turn it. And as you turn it, it makes the volume louder and louder. That's analog. It's continual. Digital is zeros and ones like in a computer. So, and in the world I grew up in, we didn't have computers, even televisions, radios, they were all analog, which means it was, you had to, if you wanted to get a station, you had to carefully tune it to get it. You don't press a button and it goes to that station. That's digital. So the mindset in the West, I discovered, was very digital. We were zeros or ones. We were either yes or no. We were or. The word and wasn't part of our epistemological vocabulary, our way of gathering knowledge. It wasn't really part of it. In the East, be it India, China, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, there's a much more nuanced look at life. And we look at things there like when I first heard a Chinta Beta Beta Tattva, simultaneously one and different, it bewildered me and fascinated me because it resolved a philosophical dilemma that I had been thinking over for 10 years. Now, why I'd been thinking of a philosophical dilemma for 10 years when I met Prabhupada is an interesting side story we may or may not have time for. But I was very digital thinker, and I had to readjust my brain to understand and that things could be this way and that way. So when I read this verse in college under Professor John Kohler when I was at RPI, when I read this verse, I asked the professor, wait, this verse makes no sense. You're either good or you're bad. Remember, a digital thinker. You're either good, you can't be both. And I said, explain this to me. And he goes, it's intuitively obvious, which is his way of saying he had no idea. He was totally lost. And he really was. Now, I'm thankful to him. He's the one that forced me to go to India. I was thinking about it and he pushed me over the edge. So then I'm meeting Prabhupada, and the very first verse, Prabhupada and I are talking, and the very first verse Prabhupada quotes to me in Sanskrit, which he knew I knew not of. We had already talked for a half a day, not recorded then. He quotes me, Api Chetsu Archaro. So you know this? And it was the only verse I knew in the whole Gita.
Wow.
Gets more interesting. That's the last verse Prabhupada quoted to me. So I didn't catch it at the time. It was some years later, I was reading over the manuscript. The original manuscript, by the way, was, I had to do the fidelity, meaning comparing it with the cassette tapes, was 108 pages. So I still have that. So I was very, when Prabhupada said that to me, we were talking, it changed my thinking. when he started explaining that verse, he was converting me from a digital to an analog thinker, being able to see fine shades of gray. And then Prabhupada said to me, when I would get bewildered, he would say this to me. He says, as you purify your consciousness, you get knowledge. And knowledge begins with faith. And he said, you have a little faith in me. And because you have a little faith in me, then you're going to do some practices. And by these practices, I'm going to raise my consciousness closer to goodness. And the more I get closer to goodness, the easier it is and the more possible it is to understand these fine shades of nuances. In other words, Prabhupada took my digital left-right brain and converted it into an analog computer for those who are electrical engineers. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a nice verse that describes what Prabhupada said to me. And when Prabhupada was speaking to me, of course, I didn't know his books at all. And as I read his books, which we all do daily, as I read his books, I realized that virtually everything Prabhupada said to me is found in his books. So here's one verse that's very important. It says, in the beginning, there must be some faith. Then one becomes interested in associating with devotees. Thereafter, one's initiated by the master, executes regulative principles. Thus, one is freed from the unwanted habits of wanting to remain a hog and becomes firmly fixed. Thereafter, one develops taste, ruchi, attachment. This is the way of sadhana bhakti. So this is the gradual development of love of God for the devotee interested in Krishna consciousness. And this verse, above all, summarizes my experience with Prabhupada in Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Now, I think I've run out of time. Is there time for a few questions? Sure. What's that? Oh, okay. Let me stop here because I try to cover a verse and Perfect Questions and get to know all of you all in 45 minutes. So do you have any questions? They better be perfect. Okay. Yes. I'll take a microphone, please.
I remember a few years back, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, and then in one purport, Prabhupada said exactly what you said, that through knowledge, your faith can increase. And then I think a verse or two later in the purport, then it said that, your knowledge can increase by faith. So then it was kind of like the circle, because it's like faith increases knowledge, knowledge increases faith. And then I was like, but then how do you start if it's like you?
That is a perfect question. That really is a good question. And Prabhupada answered that to me specifically. He says you start with a little faith, somehow or other. For example, you chanted Hare Krishna, and it's like one of those songs you can't get out of your mind, which is what happened to me when I saw a chanting party in Greenwich Village when I was like 18, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. It just stuck. It was actually Jayadvaita Swami's chanting party, and it stuck in my mind. So a little bit of faith. And then you meet a devotee. I lived in India for a good period of time, and I would, before I met the devotees there, and I would go to temples and mosques. I asked, why are you here? And it was always the same thing. I want something from God. It was like, this is business. I went halfway around the world, suffered through Delhi belly for this. I mean, come on. And then I heard Giriraj Brahmachari then speaking in Calcutta at a public event. I was there and I saw a poster, Hare Krishna. So I went to here. And it was the first time I heard anybody speak philosophical sense. And I've been in India, other than the 7-year-old who I would talk to, who actually knew the Gita, was smart. But the adults just were materialistic. materialistic like anything. And Prabhupada used to say in those days, Americans, because we were seekers then, it was the Vietnam War time, civil rights time, we were looking for something better. And Prabhupada used to say, you Americans, you are 10 steps from Krishna, facing the right way. And he says, you Indians, you are 1 step from Krishna, facing the wrong way. So that was my experience in India. So then when I heard Giriraj speak, Brahmachari then, I was fascinated. I still remember the talk. I mean, it was 50.5 years ago. It was so good. So that increased my faith. And I want to hear more. I got to hear more. And so it's in a gradual process like that. And then by that faith, what happens? We associate. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in Mayapur, there was one English person to speak to, and a few villagers came, mostly Muslim villagers, wanting to see, as Prabhupada called us, dancing white elephants. So everyone there was in a zealous mood. Not everyone, almost everyone. And there was one person to be zealous to. So Prabhupada kept me in his Bhajan kutir all day to protect me from his disciples. I'm convinced of that. And each one would give me an instruction. You must chant, you must read, you must offer your food, you must get up early, you must walk around the plant, you must do this, must do that, must do that. So the piles of shud kept rising up till it reached my eyes. I was covered with shud all the way up to my eyes. And then, what do I do? What do I do? How do I dig out of this pile of shud? And so I saw Prabhupada in Calcutta a few weeks after I'd met him in Mayapur. And I didn't word it exactly this way I'm saying it to you, but I said to Prabhupada, so many instructions, and I don't know what to do. What do I do? So he gave me an instruction that takes into account every single other instruction, everyone, all of them combined. And Prabhupada was very pithy that way, come up with just the perfect little comment. And there's one instruction, just says it all. Just trying to remember what it was. So what he said was association. Says, if I get proper association, he said to me, look, you hang out with thieves, become a thief. You hang out with Peace Corps workers who get stoned every day, what I was doing, you'll get stoned every day, which is what I was doing. So, and then of course, when I met Prabhupada, I really wanted to give that up. I did give it up, but probably if you stay in who you associate with is the one decision, most important decision. It's like this. Once I go to the airport, I go to Gainesville Airport, I can fly to Miami, Dallas, Charlotte, and Atlanta. Those are my choices. So once I get there, I can buy a ticket to any of these places. Once I get on the plane, I can get a 7-Up or an orange juice and recline my seat and bother the person behind me or not recline my seat. My choices are very limited. So similarly, we have that choice. Once we make the choice of association, we're taking away certain freedoms we have. And so we want to voluntarily give up certain freedoms in order to raise our consciousness and ultimately to get complete freedom. Because when you're Krishna conscious, you actually cannot be freer than anything. There are no restraints anymore. So it's a voluntarily giving up something else to get something greater. And we all do that. I mean, those of you who are students, I mean, you have to work real hard for some goal later on. I don't think any of your students are ever going to tell me you really love all of your classes. If so, you just can't. I mean, everyone has a different nature. Some things you like, some you don't. So Prabhupada gave me that instruction, which is the most important instruction. And if you do that, everything else falls into place. If we had to give a purpose for Krishna House, a purpose for it. When we were contemplating buying this building. Tavita Swami and I were working on buying it in 1988. That was our vision. We wanted a permanent place where devotees, where students could come and associate with devotees and get higher consciousness. The whole thing was, what can we do to have a place where there can be good association? People can even live there, and we wanted a facility like that. So that was the vision. Now, due to Kalakanta, Shruti, and all of you who are doing it, it's happening. So with that, we will stop here. Thank you very much. All glories to Prabhupada.